Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and I would like to welcome you to another system showcase for the Pathfinder 2 playtest. So, as I mentioned last week, I was supposed to actually start this video a week ago today, but due to having to go up to LA to take my friend to the airport, I wasn't able to actually join in on our first session. So, I think the group ran a one-shot instead. But we officially got started this morning. In fact, we just finished playing a couple of hours ago. And I was originally going to just immediately jump into my thoughts, my impressions, all of that. This is a first impressions video. I do want to make that very clear from the start. I'm not going to be going into great detail about how the systems work or any of that stuff, because this is the first time I've played this. I don't really have a great grasp on how the system works yet. We're all still learning the system. Everyone in this group is still learning this system, so we're learning it together, kind of supporting each other with that. So I'm not going to get into a great deal of detail about the systems as they currently stand, but tomorrow at least I'm going to try tomorrow. If I don't get it up tomorrow, I will be getting it up Monday, but I am going to be making the video today. I'm going to be making a video going into how combat works in 2nd edition Pathfinder, at least with the playtest right now. And I am actually finally going to be getting my Savage Worlds combat video up. That will be going up tomorrow. I'm going to make that before I start on the Pathfinder one, because that's been put off for far too long. In any case, yes, so a couple of hours ago I finished the playtest. As I was saying, I was originally going to record this immediately after, do the first impressions fresh in my head, but for a couple of reasons, due in part to one, the fact that, I am still learning the system, I'm not super familiar with it yet, and two, the fact that, my cats have been acting real bitchy towards each other these past couple days, so I've been having to monitor them. I decided, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take a little bit of time, since I have to sit here and separate these cats and stop them from trying to fight each other and harass each other. I'm going to take a little time, let my experience gestate a bit, let my thoughts sort of develop and digest sort of how the gameplay went, how everything felt, and really focus on what my thoughts were. Now that I've done that, I can say that, at least where first impressions are concerned, it was pretty good. It was pretty fun. Now, I'm not going to go into any roleplay, any character stuff, none of that. That's all secondary to what we're doing here for this video. The playtest material, we're looking at the mechanics, the changes between Pathfinder 1 and 2. Do they work? Do they feel good? The goal with Pathfinder 2 isn't supposed to be that, we're just making a new product. The goal with Pathfinder 2 is supposed to be, at least in part, that Paizo, at least I believe this is what they said some time ago. One of the reasons that they really started looking into doing this after Starfinder, and funny enough, it seems like they kind of ran along a similar arc to Wizards of the Coast, sort of a little repetition of history in that sense, which is part of the reason why initially I was a little concerned about some of the changes I saw. I'm going to go ahead and deviate onto this before I continue, but fun fact for those who are not aware, Star Wars Saga Edition, Wizards of the Coast's last version of the Star Wars RPG that they ever made, at least to my knowledge, that actually was, in essence, their playtest for 4th edition. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the systems and sort of mechanics and feel that they were going to move into 4th edition, they experimented with first in Star Wars Saga. I have not played Starfinder yet, but pretty much everyone else who's in my group has. I've talked with them a little bit about it. I've talked with other people who have played Starfinder a bit, who've been looking into 2nd edition, and a lot of them have told me that Starfinder kind of feels like the prelim, the lead up to Pathfinder 2, the way things work in the playtest. in the mechanical sense, that is. And looking at that, I couldn't help but think, wow, that's kind of interesting. So Paizo is sort of repeating the history that some of these people, because a lot of the people who worked at Paizo did also work at Wizards of the Coast. So Paizo is kind of repeating the history of the company that a lot of these people used to work for. Just a fun little interesting bit of trivia there. Fortunately, however, Pathfinder 2 does not feel nearly as just off, I guess. Because I don't want to say bad. I don't like 4th edition. I have a lot of gripes with it, but I hesitate to call the system bad because there were a lot of elements in it that, were pretty interesting and were a bit fun mechanically. The feel of the game, though, was completely changed with 4th edition. And there is some of that with Pathfinder 2. From the playtest material that I experienced, and to clarify what we did get to experience finally, we ran a couple of combats, did a little bit of exploration, we got to experiment a bit with different skills, the different knowledges, which are no longer listed as knowledges, and not all of them are intelligence skills anymore. That's something that's kind of different. I'm trying to recall which two it was. Nature, I know the nature skill is no longer tied to intelligence, but is tied to wisdom. And I believe social, which I believe originally was basically like knowledge local and things like that. I think that's tied to charisma now, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty certain that's tied to charisma now. So yeah, that is one change that they made that I do feel is a little bit odd. I get why. From the mechanical standpoint, I do understand why they made that change. There are specific classes that those skills are better used for, and those specific classes oftentimes don't really tend to value intelligence as a stat very much. Namely, for nature, the obvious ones that come to mind would be Ranger and Druid, especially Druid, and then to a lesser extent Barbarians as well. None of those classes particularly value intelligence as a stat. So in that sense, it does make sense that they moved it to wisdom. But in terms of the fact that this is supposed to be a knowledge ability, this is supposed to be a way that you test your understanding of a certain subject, your learning behind a certain subject, I do feel, I feel a bit disjointed about that change. I do feel a bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? I do feel a bit of, I'm blanking on the word right now, but basically it seems rather odd, from the pure mechanical standpoint. I get it. I understand why they did it, but at the same time, there's just, in a certain way, it just does not make sense. It's supposed to be basically a knowledge skill. It's supposed to represent your understanding of a specific subject. Having your understanding of specific subjects, your educated understanding of specific subjects specifically, I'm saying specific too much, tied to a skill, or tied to a stat rather, that is not intelligence, that really strikes me as odd. That was something that I only noticed that today. I didn't pay super close attention to it, but I noticed it today, and I realized, wow, that's weird. But that's just a small nitpicky thing, and I'm getting too hung up on that particular thing. So, but the point is, there are some changes that are definitely a bit odd. But overall, from my first impressions, and again, these are my first impressions, I want to make that very clear. My opinion of this is going to be refined over the coming weeks as I play through the playtest more, as I experiment with the class more, the alchemist more, as I look at what the other classes are capable of, how they've changed, and really get a chance to sit down and get a feel for how the different classes work. I will then be able to better refine my opinion and better decide at that point whether or not this is going to be a game that I feel is worth sticking with, and whether or not Paizo actually achieved their goal of essentially keeping a lot of what worked really well with Pathfinder 1 while streamlining what didn't work as well and largely trimming a lot of the fat that really kind of slowed the game down, slowed the first iteration of the game down, and really put a relatively high barrier for entry on some new players. Based on what I experienced in the 2 combats I was involved in so far, I can say that overall, at least for now, my opinion is they're fairly close to the mark that they wanted to hit. There is certainly a notable absence in customization compared to the previous edition. Pathfinder, which spawned off of 3.5, so 3.5 by extension, which 3.5 edition D&D, for those who don't know, that's what I mean when I say 3.5. It was a highly customizable game. There was a lot of choices you could make. There was a lot you could do with the different characters, a multitude of different builds you can make between the different characters, and in some ways that has been preserved. There are still quite a few options available for you to build your characters in different ways within the same class, but some of those have been dialed back, and I think that's both a good and a bad thing currently. Whether or not I lean more heavily one way or the other waits to be seen. That's going to happen as my opinion becomes refined. But currently I'm sort of in the middle on this, because on the one hand, I know from many years of personal experience having played Pathfinder that the biggest problem for me that the game had was the bloat. The original Pathfinder 1 just became enormous. Absolutely enormous. 3.5 had a similar problem as well. 3.5 became huge. There were so many supplements, so many new books that were being added, which on the one hand was really cool. I've got a collection, like, God, I think I've still got, I've lost a couple of them, gave a couple of them away, but, mostly to, like, other friends who started DMing 3.5 games. But I still have almost all of the 3.5 books that I got when I was younger, going through high school and into college. And it's a collection of almost 20 books, possibly a little more, all of them different. Now, there are multiples, were a couple of multiples. I used to have 2 players' handbooks, 2 monster manuals, and all that, but I don't anymore. I think one of my players' handbooks actually got destroyed by one of the dogs I used to have. I think she, like, tore it up because one of my siblings left it out, so she just chewed it up. And the same thing happened to my other monster manual. And then the monster manual, DM's guide, and player's handbook that I still had, I gave those to my friend Dave because he was running a D&D game for me and a couple of his friends, and after we had basically finished the second edition game that he was running, he wanted to move on to third edition because they'd been playing second edition for years, and after really looking at third edition and 3.5, they had decided, let's move on to this one. There are some things that seem weird to us because we're super used to second edition, but all in all, it just seems like a better edition, and it is. Mainly because changes that were made to second edition leading into third edition led to a lot of problems with the players becoming overpowered, but that's besides the point. Fact is, 3.5 edition, I had 20 completely different books, and there was a little bit of similarity between some of them. After all, when you've got monster manuals 1 through 5, yes, there were 5 monster manuals. That's going to be, that's just collections of monsters and templates you can use. But then there were other books, like the Book of Vile Darkness, which focused on evil things, ways to include evil in your games, evil prestige classes, evil characters, vile items, and things like that. A whole set of new rules for evilness. The Book of Exalted Deeds, which is a whole set of new rules for goodness. Libris Mortis, the Book of the Dead, which had prestige classes about being dead, or controlling the dead, or fighting the dead, and a whole second half of the book just dedicated to undead monsters. And the Fiend Folio, which was essentially a monster manual for outsiders and fiends, demons and devils and the like. And just many, many, many more. So many books, so many pieces of errata, so many different things. And Pathfinder 1 is very much the same in that respect. And on the one hand, it's great because there is so much customization. You have so many options. You have choices for days, and you can, if you're willing to knuckle down and figure out how to do it, you can pretty much build any kind of character that you want. But then on the other side, it's also a huge problem because the system becomes insanely bloated. And so that is one thing that Pathfinder 1, that was a huge weakness there. There was tons of customizability, but it came with a ridiculous amount of bloat. There was a lot of fat that needed to be trimmed. And there are some Pathfinder players out there who will claim that's not true. You're fooling yourself. If you honestly think Pathfinder 1 didn't need to be trimmed down, if you honestly think Pathfinder 1 did not have problems, massive problems, pardon the unintentional pun, with bloat, you are fooling yourself. You have the nostalgia goggles on, you are viewing through rose-tinted glasses. It absolutely had an incredible problem with bloat. It was by far the biggest problem that Pathfinder 1 faced. The changes that Pathfinder 2 has made in terms of how skills work, how proficiencies work, how the characters and some of the old things that you could do universally are now class-specific. I understand why a lot of players are kind of up in arms about that, but based on what I've seen from this first impression, I'm thinking that's probably going to end up actually being a pretty good thing. Because I'll tell you, in these 2 combats that we played, and these were level 1 combats, so, level 1 combats almost always go quick. These combats felt very smooth, very good. Everything felt very intuitive. The changes to how actions are handled felt not only intuitive and easy to pick up and understand, but also impactful. Because one of the big changes that was made to how actions are handled is now your actions are no longer divided in the setup of you have a swift action, you have a move action, and you have a standard action. And you can exchange these down in reverse order. So you can use your standard action as a move action to move twice in one round in Pathfinder 1. But you cannot use a move action as a standard action to cast 2 spells. Likewise, you can move your standard and your move action down all to swift actions to do 3 swift things, but you can't move your swift actions up to any of those other things. And once you spend that swift, move, and standard action, or pass on any of those if you do decide to do that, you're done. Pathfinder 2 simplifies this in a way that is not only elegant, but feels really good. You now just have 3 actions. Every turn you can take 3 actions. Some things that you do, some activities you undertake will cost more than 1 action. Some activities you undertake will cost 2 of your 3 actions. Some will cost all 3. But on top of 3 the 3 regular actions you have, which can be used to move, it can be used to attack, it can be used to cast spells, to interact with items, so on and so forth. I'm going to go into more proper detail on this when I detail combat. Don't worry, I will explain this in more full detail when I do that. But on top of that, you also get an unlimited number of free actions that you can take, and you get 1 reaction every turn. So let's say that you're a fighter. So let's go with the classic reaction that everybody knew, the attack of opportunity. I believe that is fighter specific now. The other martial classes might get it eventually. I'm not sure 100%. I'm going to have to look that up again, but I do know for certain that fighters do get attacks of opportunity. That is a class feature for them. And it's a reaction. So let's say an enemy does something to trigger your attack of opportunity. Let's say you were fighting an enemy, you landed a good hit on them, and on their turn, they try to move away. And that triggers an attack of opportunity. So you use a reaction, you get your attack of opportunity. That's your reaction for that round, and you get your next reaction back. You get your reaction back when your next turn comes around. You spend it just like you would your 3 actions. It's elegant and it's simple. But the great thing is, as I mentioned, because you just have 3 universal actions, now I want you to think about something here. You're no longer divided into swift action, move action, standard action. You just have action, 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 and you pick what you want to do. Well, let's say, again, you're a fighter, and you're already up against your enemy, you're face to face, you want to attack him. You spend an action to attack. What do you want to do with your other 2 actions? You're a fighter. What do you really want to do with your other 2 actions? Well, you probably want to attack. You attack again. You can do that. At level 1. At level 1, you can attack up to 3 times in a single turn, provided you're actually capable of doing so. Now, you incur penalties when you do this. Every subsequent attack is going to give you a -5 penalty, which is exactly how full attack actions worked in the previous edition. Once you hit the point with your base attack bonus that you could unlock another attack, it was 5 points lower to do that attack. The difference is now you don't have to dedicate, call out, I'm doing a full attack action. You can actually just attack twice and then move, or move, then attack twice. Our paladin in our group, he did that multiple times. He'd walk up and take 2 big swings with his maul anytime he could. Same with our monk. He'd walk up, do a flurry of blows, and then follow it up with a second flurry of blows. It's all doable from level 1, and that feels great as a player. As a character, it feels great. It makes you feel strong right at the start, which is absolutely fantastic. Even if you end up missing, you still feel pretty strong right at the start, just knowing that, hey, at level 1, I can make multiple swings on an enemy. You could not do that in the previous edition. That's a whole new thing that opens up. Hell, in 5th edition, you can't do that there either. If you want to get multiple attacks in a round, you have to unlock the extra attack class feature. But every class in Pathfinder 2 can make multiple combat actions in a round. And I'm going to have to look up spells again and read up on this to be absolutely sure, but I do think that it is possible too. I'm not positive, But I think it's possible, maybe. Again, I'm going to have to look this up to make absolutely sure. But it may also be possible to cast multiple spells in a turn as well, because of how the new action system works. Again, third time repeating this, I have to look it up to be sure. I'm just saying the possibility may be there, which is great for making your characters feel powerful. Here's the thing, though. Your enemies can do this, too. And because of this, Pathfinder 2 has managed to capture something that the early levels of the original Pathfinder, and especially 5th edition, did not capture as well. And that's lethality. Now, don't be mistaken when I say, oh, the early levels of Pathfinder didn't capture this as well. I'm not saying that the early levels of Pathfinder straight up did not capture this. If I was going to say that, I would be talking about 5th edition, and I'm going to straight up say it. 5th edition has a serious, serious problem with lethality not really feeling particularly pleasant. And I know that is something that people have talked to death about already, so I'm not really going to go into it beyond that. Suffice to say, there are certain spells, certain abilities, certain ways in which armor and armor class and all of that function that have actually reduced the lethality of the monsters and the threats in 5th edition, which is something that I don't think Wizards, the crew behind 5th edition at Wizards, fully took into account. Pathfinder 2 does not have that problem. In the second combat of this first session, we did 3 combats actually, but we will start with the second combat of this first session. Our paladin, he got hit. He got a pretty good hit laid on him by a goblin. A pair of good hits, I believe. I believe he got shanked twice in one round by the same goblin, and he took a decent chunk of damage. It wasn't a whole lot, but we're level 1. We've all only got like 14, 15, 16, 17 health. Health is a little higher low level now because of how it's calculated, and that's a good thing because of the fact the lethality is upped. So yeah, he took a couple hits, got hurt a little bit. It wasn't terrible, but he was definitely wounded. We move on to a later room. We end up fighting a couple of small devils. Small demons. I'm not sure what they were. Maybe dredges or something. I don't know. We weren't actually told what they were. They looked like imps, but that's the tokens that were used. As they looked like imps, but they said they were demons, not devils. So either way, we got attacked, and the one who got attacked primarily was the paladin, because it was the paladin who accidentally triggered their summoning, and they were pissed at him because this being of holiness, this paladin of Iomade, has removed and tried to destroy the statue of Lamashtu, the mother of beasts and demons and all that stuff. So they weren't happy with that, and they started attacking him. They got a couple hits off on him, and thanks to, it was in part just really high rolls from the GM, but also the fact that, the lethality, just generally speaking, is upped. Even if the GM had rolled 5 or 6 points lower than what he did, because he was rolling about like 14s, 15s for almost every one of their attacks, even if he had rolled 5 or 6 points lower, he still would have probably ended up hitting, based on the numbers that I saw coming up. And these little demons had poison-tipped claws, and the paladin, just partly through bad luck, but also partly through the fact that, these little demons are, for level 1 demons, the challenge rating was equivalent for our party. It was 2 demons versus a party of 4. I believe they were each challenge rating 1/2. So it was a fair challenge for our party. And within that first round of attacks, the paladin went down. He dropped, and he was unconscious and dying, largely because of their poison. He missed a couple of the fortitude saves, barely missed. It did damage, and just that ate away at him within the first round of combat, and he was not that badly wounded before. And so, right off the bat, the lethality of the whole thing kicked in. The guy who was almost our highest armored, hardiest character, and it was in terms of health and everything anyway, he's our hardiest character, went down in a single round because these imps were able to take their multiple attacks, and they were able to apply multiple stacks of this poison just because of how the changes that were made work. So not only does it feel satisfying to the player, but it forces a little more thoughtfulness into the combat and into how everything functions. The same kind of goes with the skills too. The skills on the surface have been greatly simplified. A lot of the fat has been trimmed. You're not putting ranks into your skills anymore. It is a little bit more similar to 5th edition in that, your skills are largely going to up with your proficiency and all that. But as opposed to 5th edition, where it's basically you're either proficient in your skill or you're not, with Pathfinder 2, the proficiency levels provides a little bit more of an elegant way of doing things, because between the proficiency levels and the selection of your signature skills, you are now not only providing, you're not only getting that universal kind of proficiency to boost your skills, but you are actively selecting through your signature skills which skills it is that you're primarily going to focus on, because it's the signature skills that are going to be the ones that are going to be able to level up to legendary eventually. They're going to be able to get that big boost. So the sense of choice, the sense that, you can decide specifically, these are the skills I want to focus on, these are the areas where I want to make my build matter, this and that. That's still there. It's not to the same degree as Pathfinder 1, and it's not in the same manner as Pathfinder 1. Like I said, the fat has been trimmed. It's no longer an issue of picking ranks and adding ranks and doing all of that extra math. It's more simplified now. The math is still definitely there, but it's a lot simpler. The numbers are going to be smaller on the whole. And for some players, that's going to rub them the wrong way. For me personally, I don't really care if the numbers are smaller. The size of the numbers doesn't matter to me so much as how the mechanics actually feel when you're playing them. If the mechanics feel good when you're playing it, then, the fact that the numbers are small is sequential to me. In fact, I personally would argue that it might actually be a little bit better that the numbers are smaller, because you will probably be able to more easily add things up at a glance, which is going to make things move faster, which is going to make your pace feel better. So that was something else I noticed with the combat. Even though it's level 1 combat, level 1 combat in Pathfinder 1 usually went pretty damn quick too. But even though we were all learning this system and kind of, trying to figure out a lot of the new rules and having to slow down for that, once we got a better feel for it and really started kind of getting in our groove, figuring things out, the pace of combat just feels a little bit better than in Pathfinder 1. Partly because of the action changes that I mentioned, partly because of just the simple changes to the basic mechanics of character building. Things just feel a little bit smoother. They might not necessarily actually be faster, but it feels faster paced, which is nice. Now, obviously, again, first impression, and this is level 1 we're talking about here. So we got to bear in mind the fact that, level 1 in any tabletop RPG, it's gonna feel pretty quick with your combats. because you're not going to have as much to do. You don't have as many options to choose from. Although, I do want to get into that after this, but basically, at level 1, you don't have as much to choose from in the way of options. It's a little simpler, it's a little more just direct and kind of, basic and pretty standard, easy stuff. What we're going to see, though, or what we're going to have to look for, I should say, is how combat handles at higher levels. As you start gaining levels, as you start making stronger characters, getting towards, the 10s, the teens, and eventually climbing up to level 20 if you go that far. Once you start getting access to those bigger damage spells, once you start getting access to those higher impact abilities, once you start getting access to a much broader range of options, how is it going to go then? Once you start getting more feats, more class abilities, more things that change the way your character functions and bring you out of those early level basics into something more involved, how is the pace going to feel then? That's what the real question is going to be. And that is another way in which my opinion is going to evolve and grow and sort of become a little more focused over time. It's, my opinion is going to change over time. First impressions we rarely keep, and I can guarantee you these first impressions are not going to stick with me. They definitely will have an impact on how I view the game going forward, but it's going to be how the game feels in the moment that's really going to decide, and eventually, as my opinion evolves, as my thoughts about the game evolve, as I experience more of it, how all of these new systems and all these changes feel mechanically as the game progresses is gonna, have a much more massive impact on my opinion of the game than these first impressions will. But I did mention that I wanted to touch on the idea of early level options in combat. Now, I cannot say for sure about the other classes. I haven't played them yet. I'm going to talk with the other players tonight and kind of ask them, what their thoughts are, if they feel like they have a lot of options in terms of what they can do for combat and out of combat with their classes early on. In terms of the skills and everything, I feel like we all had a pretty good amount of options with the more limited skill tree and with the way that skills were changed. It felt like every single one of us was able to contribute in different ways, not just because we necessarily picked different skills. There was actually a fair amount of skill overlap in our group. The Paladin and I, for example, both took the medicine skill because, I, as an alchemist, it makes sense for me to grab the medicine skill. I'm not as good at it as he is, but I can make for a good backup character providing treatments with the medicine skill. And I was actually able to save his life by using the medicine skill to help treat his poison. And I aided him in doing that, as did our sorcerer, who was also good at medicine. So we had 3 people in the group who were good at the medicine skill. We were all able to make use of it together, and it still felt good. We still had a lot of options that we could choose from, a lot of things that we could do with the smaller but more simplified and kind of just. It's smaller and more simplified, but it's not lacking in options. The skill tree is what I'm trying to get at. Because depending on whether your skill is trained or untrained, if you're trained in different skills, you're going to unlock new actions that you can take with those skills. Which is the same way it was in the original Pathfinder. It's just that the way it's laid out and the way it's set up is a little more direct and a little more concise and clear. It's not kind of as buried and hidden in text as some of the other skill things in the previous edition could sometimes be. A lot of our knowledge with skills in the previous edition And I think this is something that a lot of people don't realize. Pathfinder 1, a lot of our knowledge was skills. We didn't learn it in Pathfinder 1. We learned it in 3.5. We already knew it. We were porting our previous knowledge. We weren't learning these skills anew. We were porting our old knowledge of the skills and just sort of understanding what the changes to the skills were, which was largely just taking skills that were separate and combining them into a single skill now. That's most of what happened with the skills from 3.5 into Pathfinder. And it's not really that wildly different in Pathfinder 2 either. How you calculate the skills is different, but the general effect of the skills is still the same, and now the breakdown is a little more clear as to how you use those skills. The options are all still there, but how you use them is more clear, which is, in my opinion, quite nice. That's actually, I think, one of the best changes that they've made. Now, it's not perfect. And one skill in which I found that there were real problems in terms of actually gleaning the information in a quick, concise manner is the crafting skill. But I'm going to get into that in full at a later point as well, because I don't, like I said, I don't really want to go into too much detail about, you know, all the different little changes and all of this and all of that. I really just want to keep to my impressions of what I experienced playing the game. And wow, I'm really just this video is just going on. I originally expected this to just be a quick 15-minute video, but the fact is I got a lot of talk. I have a lot to talk about with this. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's different. So, options though, and again, I need to talk with the other players. You know, we have a monk, we have a sorcerer, we have a paladin in the party. You need to talk with them and see, like, hey, you know, in terms of your options at level 1, in combat and out of combat, do you feel like you have more or less than in Pathfinder 1? Because let me tell you something. Interestingly enough, for Pathfinder 2, I don't think I actually do have more available options to me as an alchemist in Pathfinder 2 than in Pathfinder 1. In fact, I'm almost positive that my options at level 1 as an alchemist are less. But it feels like I have more options. And it feels like I have more options because the options I do have to pick from are definitely more impactful than they were in Pathfinder 1. Pathfinder 1, my options were entirely relegated to the elixirs I would pick each day. And with an alchemist at low level, you have options, but it's, and I kind of hate to say it, but this is one of the criticisms I did have for the class, even though it is my favorite class. You kind of just have options in name only. There are certain things that you must take as an alchemist to really be effective. Certain abilities, certain discoveries, certain extracts that you must take, you must make. They're essentially taxes on your character that if you really want to be effective, you have to do it. You don't really have a choice. Pathfinder 2, you have less choices available overall. And the reason is because they've changed how the bombs work. Bombs as a class feature don't really exist as a class feature anymore. I know that sounds really weird. Let me explain. One of the biggest changes to alchemists, in fact, I would argue it's probably the biggest change, is how bombs work. In Pathfinder 1, bombs were purely a class ability. You basically got like a little clay pot or something, you mixed a few things into it, and then you threw it. That was your standard action for using a bomb. And through discoveries, you could make different types of bombs. Your basic bomb was a fireball. Through your discoveries, you could make frost bombs that could slow people. You could make smoke bombs to blind people. You could make noxious gas bombs, which would blind people and potentially make them sick. You could do, I think one they added for drow characters specifically, which my last alchemist was they called it, I think, a void bomb, which was essentially like My god, that was one of the most ridiculously powerful CC abilities in the game, and you could get it at level 6. It was so absurdly strong. But you could get that. But it was all through discoveries. And it was basically just, you had a certain number of bombs you could make each day. You make the bomb, you decide which bomb you're making when you make it, you throw it. The enemy, if it has a special effect, the enemy rolls their saving throw. If they make the save, the enemy that's hit doesn't have to deal with the effect. If they fail the save, they do, so on and so forth. And then, of course, you had the ability to craft the alchemical items as well as making your elixirs. So, in terms of stuff to do, technically, you had more. But in terms of impact, a lot of it was less impactful because there were a few specific items and a few specific elixirs that you were looking for to make. There were a few things that just stood out above the rest in terms of power and value. And there were ways as an alchemist that you could find more power and value out of alchemical items and the like. The items like the hybridization funnel, which would allow you to combine 2 different alchemical items into one item. So, for example, you could take an alchemist's fire and a tangle burn bag and combine both of their effects into one, so that you would have basically a tangle burn bag that did even more fire damage when you threw it. Or you could take, let's say, alchemist frost and mix it with a flask of acid to deal frost damage to an enemy and slow them, and then also deal the persistent acid damage. That was one way that you could enhance your items. And depending on the archetype you took as a alchemist in Pathfinder 1, you could do things like with the Grenadier archetype, the Grenadier archetype, which was the one I usually played. I really enjoyed that one. You got an ability that allowed you to apply your alchemical items to a weapon. And that included your bombs. So if you were making a frost bomb, for example, you could mix an acid flask in there when you made it, and now you've got a frost bomb that deals your bomb damage, plus the damage from the acid flask. So there were ways to make the alchemical items more useful, but if you weren't an alchemist, they just weren't as useful. It was your extracts that really did it as an alchemist. But now, your bombs are themselves the alchemical items. Alchemist fire is your primary bomb. It's your old fire bomb. It's alchemist fire now. And anyone can use it. Anyone can use it, but no one can use it as well as an alchemist can. Same thing with, like the old frost bombs. Well, now you have liquid ice, which is, the frost version of alchemist fire. It deals less damage, but it slows your enemies. I believe the enemy that's hit, I don't think they have to make a save. I think if you hit, they're slowed, and then I think after a turn or something they can make a save. Again, I'll have to look a lot of this stuff up. I'll get a lot of this information corrected when I actually go into the combat video and I'll start discussing my class's abilities and all that stuff. Another one they have is, this is the new one that I thought was really cool, bottled lightning. You throw a bottle with, an alchemical compound that releases a burst of electricity that causes the target that is hit to be flat-footed until the end of your next turn. I made really good use of that today after our paladin went down. I hit the imp that took him down with it. And granted, there was some risk involved because, the splash damage was there and he got hit, which, did cause him to move another point down on his death tally. But the imp became much easier to take out, much easier to drive out of the fight because, I've just reduced his armor by 2 for the rest of the round leading to my next turn, meaning every other character in our party is now able to hit them more easily. I have access now to tanglefoot bags again. And, a lot of the old alchemical items are still there. But here's the thing. They're all, generally speaking, more impactful now. There are less of them overall, but the ones that are there, the ones that remained, almost all feel much more impactful than the very, very wide variety of items and abilities that you had available for Alchemist, many of which, in terms of their power and their usefulness, were actually on the weaker end of things. So the choices might not be as prevalent, which is of course to be expected too, because you're moving into an entirely new system. You know, you no longer have the dearth of choices that you get across dozens of books. So your choices are of course going to be more limited. But more limited though they are, you also have more meaningful, more impactful choices available. And that is much more important than having a dearth of choices. Because you can have the biggest variety of choices in the world for your character, but if they don't actually have a significant impact, then it's not going to feel good. Those choices aren't really going to feel that good, and you're not going to feel satisfied when you use the abilities tied to those choices. Just the impact is lessened. In Pathfinder 2, although the choices aren't as great, there's not as many of them, the impact, at least for now, feels more substantial. Whether or not it will stay that way, that waits to be seen. So that's all I've got for you, friends and gamers. My God, we climbed up to 51 minutes. I had planned for this to be a 15-minute video, but hey, like I said, we had a lot to talk about with this. So that's all I've got today, friends and gamers of all stripes. As usual, my name is GM Dave, and I am your man behind the screen. If you liked this video, please feel free to leave it a like. And if you would like to discuss Pathfinder 2 in a little bit more detail, drop a comment down below. What are your thoughts on Pathfinder 2? If you've played it yet, if you've played the playtest, what are your thoughts on it? Does it feel good to you? Do you not like it as much? Does it have a bit of that 4th edition feel that I was afraid that it might have, you know, with some of the wild departures it makes? Currently, I'm not really feeling that so much. I feel like it actually feels pretty good to play. It feels like it took a lot of what 5th edition did right and a lot of what Pathfinder 1 did right and sort of married them in a way that more or less feels like it works. But again, we're going to refine our opinion going forward. We'll see if we still feel that way as we go on. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Do you think Pathfinder 2 as a system mechanically works well if you've tried it? If you have hang-ups about it, what are your hang-ups? You know, let me know in the comments down below. If you like my video and you would like to see more, please feel free to subscribe and hit that bell notification icon to get notified when I post new videos like this. More importantly than that, I strongly recommend you follow me on social media. Links in the description down below for regular updates anytime I post a new video. Furthermore, if you like what I do and you would like to support me financially, I do have a Patreon page open. You can find the link for that in the description below. And if you would like, I would also recommend that you follow me on BitChute. Once again, link in the description below. And there goes the camera falling. I would also recommend that you follow me on BitChute in order to get not only regular updates there as well. Anytime I post a video to YouTube, it gets mirrored on BitChute, but also so that you can get some exclusive content that I am only going to be posting to BitChute. Content like my video on the tonal shift of Darling and the Franks and the lesson that we can learn for that in our games. So, with all of that said, friends and gamers of all stripes, thank you for sticking with me for this much longer than expected video. I do really apologize for the length, but like I said many times already, there was a lot to talk about here. So as usual, dear friends and gamers of all stripes, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and as always, it is my sincere hope that you continue to roll high, roleplay well, and game on.